Hi, and welcome to this episode of OmniScience Capital discussion. And I have my colleague Dr. Vikas Gupta with me. Hi,
Hello.
Vikas.
Hi.
It's really good to be back here. You
Absolutely.
started the journey, so I'm just joining you now.
Super.
And for today, we are going to discuss, the concept of Amrit Kaal. It's a very, very important and mega concept as far as India or Indian economy is concerned. And we have seen a large number of estimates now. People have been talking about how big we could be, where what is the vision, and
Right.
how large it can reach. So we have presented our estimates in terms of various scenarios, in terms of being very, very extremely conservative, where we could reach, or being fairly, what is the base case, and could be very, very optimistic in terms of how if we can achieve what our true potential is.
Absolutely.
And the numbers look very large to I would say to reasonably expectation, the base case, the conservative case.
Right.
But how do we go about understanding these numbers, Vikas? And specifically, because whenever you put out a big number, like the immediate reaction is kind of oh, this is something crazy, you're just trying to portray a very, very rosy picture about
Right.
things.
Right.
And people had challenges with accepting, oh, can we be a 5 trillion economy, or
Correct.
how long will it take, and things like that. Now we are putting out a number like a 50 trillion economy.
Right.
So it's massive.
Right.
But it's not crazy. This is what I think our discussion should
Yeah,
kind of lay
and it's funny when people say such things because they are from the financial markets and they all know the power of compounding
come on. Right.
over the long term.
Right.
So it's just the time horizon is longer and slightly higher rates will take you to very large numbers. Everyone
Sure.
knows that when they're advising someone personally to invest. Right?
Correct. Correct.
But when the country is going to grow, somehow,
Somehow-
I am skeptical, I
Right.
am somehow over smart, so I'm
Right.
skeptical and all that.
Right.
That yeah, it might be just this much, but still I don't see how it will happen.
Right.
So that was really funny when people used to discuss whether 5 trillion is possible or not.
Right.
I mean, it was obvious, it was guaranteed that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of which year.
Right.
Right. So all these things don't make sense. So anyway, let's come back to our assumptions. So first, just repeat. Let's repeat the numbers.
Yeah.
So base case.
Base case is, or rather, let me start with a very conservative case itself. It's around $24 trillion. Okay.
By 2047.
2047,
Right?
absolutely. 25, like, and it's a full 25-year scenario because these estimates were done in 2022,
Correct.
right?
Using 22 numbers.
Numbers,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And where the starting point for Indian GDP was around $3.5 trillion,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
The conservative case is around $30 trillion.
Yes.
The base case, as per our estimates, is around $38 trillion, right? The optimistic is around $60 trillion, and the really aggressive, or really optimistic case is something more than $90 trillion.
Correct.
So that's where the number. Maybe we can talk about what goes inside, like what are our GDP real growth rate estimations and other inputs to arrive at these numbers.
Sure. So India has been growing at 7 to 8% or even 8% plus over last 2 decades, right? We all know that. And there are sustained periods of 5 years plus when we were growing at 8% plus. So 8, 8.5, 8.3 and so on. So clearly 7% odd, which means 7 point something, is the average of last 20 years. So that's the base case, at least from the historical perspective. Now, going forward, and this is in a situation when infrastructure was bad, when policies were not fully in place, when things were not fully in place.
Correct.
Okay. Now, assuming that you're getting more and more better at putting all things into harmony, right? All things acting together, supporting each other, then your growth rate should be even higher, base growth rate. Right? So this is the basic logic behind it. But still, our very conservative scenario is the 6% real GDP growth rate. Okay. The confusion in people's mind lies when they confuse real GDP growth rate versus nominal growth rate versus nominal rupee versus dollars, right?
Right.
So there are 2 nominal growth rates as well.
Right.
So all of these things, that's why people were saying, how can you grow at 7% or 6% and reach 5 trillion?
Right.
Because obviously that is not possible.
Right.
Real GDP 5 trillion is not possible, right? At that time.
Sure.
But nominal dollar terms is what our simulation is.
Sure.
Right. So what are the three factors? The real GDP,
right,
the in rupee inflation, and
Sure.
then the USD versus INR depreciation or appreciation. These three things have to be accounted for to do a
to arrive at the nominal rupee
dollar
growth
nominal dollar
and nominal dollar
growth
growth
rate.
rate.
Right?
Absolutely.
And we are talking here nominal dollar growth rate because
Dollar
we are calculating everything in dollars.
dollar terms. Sure.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the very conservative scenario is something like a 6%
6%.
GDP
Yes.
real growth,
Yes.
which is again like we have done significantly better. So it's absolutely the most conservative case.
Yes.
The conservative case is something like which we have done at like 7% average
Correct.
when infrastructure was not supporting.
Exactly.
Right? And we could still grow at 7.
At 7 plus.
So obviously the base case becomes like a 8% real growth.
Exactly.
While you are allocating significantly on the capital.
Exactly.
You have your productivity improvement kicking in. You have a population base which is supporting this growth, right?
Exactly.
All these things. So obviously the basic the base case of assuming 8%, I think is a very fair estimation.
Yes.
Moving on to optimistic, and how do you
so that goes to 9% and then 10%.
Okay.
Now 9 and 10 is also, I mean, we have at least 4 countries which have done this consistently for long periods of time, right?
Sure.
So Japan, China, Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, right? These are the 4 countries which have done it, and all are slightly different. China seemingly is similar to us with very large population base. Japan was not a large population country, but more of automation. Right. South Korea and Taiwan, yes, automation was part of it. Population was definitely not very large. Right. Of course, and majority of them did lot of exports.
Sure.
But they've done 10% for decades. Keep that in mind. So it's possible.
So makes sense. Like currently, when we are saying the base case is 8%, with productivity improvement happening, with all the investments which are going into improving your logistics and manufacturing capabilities, supporting all kinds of newer age technologies. So obviously, you can inch up and go to a 9%.
So there are 4 factors.
Yeah.
One is population. So population will grow at roughly around 1%, slightly less or slightly more, right? So that is one thing that only adds 1% seemingly.
Right.
But actually the population which we are talking about should be the population which is more skilled.
Yes.
And which is going from middle income to higher income kind of stuff, right? So that growth rate is much higher.
Right.
Okay, maybe 5 to 6%, right?
True.
So that is one thing which is driving the consumption side of it. And obviously they're producing as well. Right?
Sure.
So that population is one, productive population. Number 2 comes infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, it used to take 5 days or something like that from Delhi to Bombay or Mumbai to Chennai. A truck would take 5-6 days, right, to deliver stuff. So it's when we say infrastructure is bad, this is what it means.
True.
And when you say that an Indian worker on an average is less productive, this is one of the factors.
Correct.
Right. Second factor is obviously inside the factory how he is doing. If he is using primitive machinery, then it's like despite working as hard and having equal muscle power, people somehow think that an Indian worker has low muscle power or something, is less productive than a Chinese. Chinese is 3 times more productive. So it's not like it's super.
Right.
Okay, it's the machinery.
Right.
So second is the infrastructure, which is roads, railways, all of that, power availability, right? A lot of times there is no power in Indian factories, etc. Right? Used to be like that. Third is automation. Right, which is having high-end machinery, industry 4.0, robotics and all that. And then the final one would be AI.
Sure.
Right? So there are so many layers which will be driving this productivity growth.
Correct. And I think finally the exports is a big piece which is completely missing today from the GDP growth that we can achieve. And I think given the focus on being the whatever you call it, China plus one, or supplying to the world, that's where the additional growth will come from.
Absolutely. Right. So from already we are 0.7 trillion exports or something. Right. by 2030 we should be, probably touching more than $1 trillion for sure. Right, could be even 2 trillion if all goes well. Right, and so significant amount of exports are there. So 2 trillion should be somewhere between 2030 to somewhere 2035. Somewhere in between you will cross 2 trillion of exports. Right, very likely. So significant exports. And everyone wants to diversify away from China, have another source. India is the only country with such a large capability or resources and population and all that. Right. Third factor is inflation, which goes into this. And the RBI base case is to maintain between 2 to 6. So average is around 4. That is primarily bundled into the assumptions here, 4% kind of inflation. And developed economies are 2%. US is 2%. So we are going from 4 to 2 as we get more and more developed. Okay. So that is a set of things which is bundled in. And then when you start exporting significantly, instead of depreciating, which we have been depreciating at 2.5-3%, so we have assumed a 2% depreciation typically. But beyond 2030, it could be appreciation. And again, we have seen that when you have very large sustained exports like Japan or South Korea, there is around a 2% kind of a appreciation in the currency over decades. It could happen in one particular year if you let it appreciate, because many times they manipulate and do that. But CAGR basis, it's like 2%.
Yeah, so I think that makes it quite clear in terms of what are the building blocks to this estimation. And that was the idea to discuss and give clarity. It's just not the large number that we want investors to focus on, but go behind the scene and see how you can arrive and why there is a lot of tangibility and kind of reality to these numbers, and gives us a big vision for India. So that is that one discussion that we wanted to conclude. This leading to how broadly, like for people of India, how it is going to impact, because the question is that okay, we very soon will be third largest economy, so we are already fifth largest economy.
Absolutely.
And then maybe in next 20-25 years we will be either number 1, 2 or 3, right? Or 1 or 2, let's say, right? So but we're just going from fifth to second or first, right? So it's a good improvement, but still you are already one of the last top 5. So I think that's also important that we'll talk about the GDP per capita and what it translates into in terms of the general standard of living and stuff like that.
Sure.
So always keep in mind that investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing. And also that registration granted by SEBI, membership of BASL and certification from NISM in no way guarantee performance of the intermediary or provide any assurance of returns to investors.